UK Prime Minister Theresa May says she's sad over the results of the country's election, but she's moving forward by setting up a new government.
This government will guide the country through the crucial Brexit talks that begin in just 10 days and deliver on the will of the British people by taking the United Kingdom out of the European Union.
May met with Queen Elizabeth this morning to seek permission to form a government with the support of Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party. The Prime Minister had called for an early election to strengthen her hand in Brexit, but instead her Conservative Party lost its majority in Parliament. Dan Ashby, UK correspondent for Feature Story News, is joining us from London to help us break down the election results. Dan, Prime Minister Theresa May isn't letting go. She's still the Prime Minister. What happens next?
Well, what we have is a sort of informal coalition, which you have to understand is a fairly extraordinary turn of events here in the UK. What we are used to is strong governments. Our parliamentary system is set up to get those strong governments. For the vast majority of UK election, one party gets more than 50% of members of Parliament in the House of Commons, and with that is allowed to govern. What we have here is no party actually doing that. The closest is the Conservatives, and what they've done is they've approached the Democratic Unionists in Northern Ireland and asked them to support them, which they've agreed to do, hoping that will help them pass legislation and rule.
Well, this election comes right after a series of terrorist attacks in the UK. What was the biggest issue on voters' mind?
Up until about halfway through this campaign, it was all about the European Union, of course, Britain exiting the European Union in 2 years' time, the economy, public services, a wide-ranging debate about whether the NHS is good enough, whether schools are good enough. But then, of course, we had that devastating news halfway through the campaign that 22 people had been killed by a nail bomb in Manchester, followed by a terror attack in London at the weekend, and that completely transformed the campaign. In the last few days, everybody was talking about security, with both the opposition party and the ruling Conservative Party accusing each other of falling short.
Britain is set to exit the EU in 2019, as you mentioned. How will the results of this election impact the Brexit negotiations?
Well, the whole theory of this election was that Theresa May wanted to strengthen her hand. She had sky-high popularity when she called the election. The general assumption was that she would get a bigger majority, even a landslide. That would allow her to go to Brussels and say that she represented the will of the people and they had chosen her model of Brexit. Of course, what's actually happened is the opposite. We have a hung parliament where no party has got an overall mandate. That will make the negotiations far more difficult.
Dan, do you know or have a sense of how British Catholics voted?
Well, traditionally, studies have shown that Catholics have tended to support the Labour Party in the UK, although recently that pattern hasn't been so consistent. What we might see is a more elevated role for Northern Irish issues, religious issues and social issues in UK politics as a whole.
Dan Ashby, UK correspondent for Feature Story News. Thanks so much for talking with us.
OK, thank you.